Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about the Nintendo Switch. Specifically the question that has been bothering my YouTube comment section for probably over 4 years now. What console generation does the Nintendo Switch belong to? Yes, these are the hard-hitting, important questions that we have to deal with. But in all seriousness, this comes up a lot, and I thought it was time to address it because it's now been 4 years. At the time you're watching this, the Nintendo Switch is 4 years old. Just a little bit over. It launched on March 3rd, 2017, and here we are now, and it's just like, I think we need to debate this. We need to talk about it, and I'm going to explain why I feel it's not really an opinion anymore of where it is. It just is. But let's break that down and first understand what is a console generation. I take this very seriously. I just want you guys to know this. It shouldn't be any great secret if you watch my channel. I got videos on like consoles like all over the damn place of like different, like their whole histories, where they sit, why they exist, whatever. And so it matters to me when you define stuff like this. And for some reason, people tend to take console generations and make an opinion out of it like it should be. And I think that actually stems from the fact that console manufacturers, you have to understand, don't sit down and say, all right, what's going to be our 5th gen console? They just say, what's going to be our next console? That's all they say. The generations concept was invented retroactively by fans to more or less give borders between things so people knew like when you had the old one versus when you had the relevant one versus what's going to be the next thing. You know, that's basically how that works. But console companies don't really care about that. They focus on their own specific hardware for their own specific reasons. Whether they feel they need to upgrade it for their own, technological need to drive forward, whether the developers are pushing them to do it, whether their console flopped and they want to make some changes, whether customers are telling them this sucks and you need to do this or whatever. Whatever it is, they change for their own reasons. That leads to oddities. There's a lot of them littered throughout console history. This, my friends, is by far the most chaotically debated one out there. So I think it's important before going into all this to really understand kind of what the definition of a console is. And the sad part is there isn't any great crystal clear definition. But I'll put this to you. I mentioned this in my podcast, and I was trying to make it a clear example of why this type of thing is confusing. How many out there, ask yourself, seriously, how many out there could seriously tell me the exact definition of a country without looking it up? What is the definition of a country? I know it's going to sound weird, but I'm trying to make a point. And then I would sit there and go like, okay, would anybody out there debate that, Italy is a country? Probably not. I think most of us would go, yeah, of course Italy is a country. Why are we even talking about this? Yet, the definition of a country is incredibly vague. It's basically like, it's a population inside of a land border. That's like about all it is. Well, wait a minute. That could apply to like anything. That could apply to a city. That could apply to a county. That could apply to a municipality. That could apply to an island. That could apply to a state. That could apply to Hong Kong. That could apply to Taiwan. Do you see what I'm saying? It's not always that clear. There are some examples where something that meets every criteria of what a country is not considered one, say Hong Kong. Or in the reverse, sometimes there's ones that don't quite meet that criteria, and yet they are considered one, like say the Vatican. Sometimes stuff is vague. And if you ask the UN, they'll tell you like number of countries, around 200, because nobody really knows. Because the thing that ultimately defines what a country is do other countries consider you a country? And that's why you have certain countries that are recognized and certain that are not. And I know this isn't about countries, but that's kind of my point, though. That's a little bit what console generations are like. People consider it opinions, but it's not really an opinion. It's just kind of a muddled definition. So let's break down what that muddled definition essentially is. If you ask me, it's really 3 parts. 1, the most obvious to most people, technology. What is a technological upgrade is the most physical, obvious barrier when it comes to a new console generation. It's like, oh, we used to have 2D, now we have 3D. We used to have the 64 bits, now we have the 128 bits, or whatever. You get it. That's the thing that people like to focus on the most. But the other 2 that I think are very relevant is timing. Timing is a big one. You know, like when it came out, what else existed already? What was about to exist? What had existed before? You know, like as previous competition, what have you? Timing. What year was the thing released? And then finally, and that also applies to like how long a platform may or may not exist. And then finally, this is the one that never is talked about, is marketing intentions. Why was that console released? What was it meant to compete against? That's a big thing. So let's apply that to the Switch. Now with the Switch, you have to understand, this is a console or a platform, let's use that word. This is a platform that is so convoluted in this minefield of definition that there's actually, I've seen 4, not 1, not 2, not 3, 4 different consensus of what generation this thing applies to. The first one that's been thrown out there, though, this one's kind of common, but I've seen less and less of it. But this one is actually an interesting case. I don't personally subscribe to it, but it is the case that is made, which is, sorry, I'm sure you can hear sirens outside. The case that tends to be made is that it doesn't belong to any console generation because it's not a home console. This is a portable. The argument made there is traditionally, this is not the successor to the Wii U. It is the successor to the 3DS and just uses a lot of the Wii U's capabilities. This thing, you know, out of the box, you could play it portably. Out of the box, it used a lot of the same marketing intentions and motives and energy that Nintendo transferred from the 3DS. Again, you can look back at history and say the Wii U was a flop, but the 3DS wasn't. So they just brought the 3DS base over and said, this is the new 3DS. This is our new portable. Just focus on that. And yeah, whatever, it plugs into a television. That's a case that gets made. Hell, another argument there is really the Nintendo Switch Lite, which does not even connect to a television. And on top of that, only about, I think there was some poll once, and it was like 20% of people who play a Switch claim they use it on a television. By all those arguments, you could really make the case, yeah, it's not part of a home console generation, it's part of a platform or a portable generation. Now, personally, I don't subscribe to that, and my reasoning is simple, that I would consider it really the first hybrid, true hybrid console, as I've said for a couple of years. And the reason is, day one, you were always intended to be able to use this either way. From the very beginning, you could plug this into a television and go. In fact, if you did so, there was additional benefits. It would support higher resolutions and, you know, have better performance and all that sort of stuff. And then, of course, you know, there's other third-party options like, say, the M Classic or whatever to upgrade it, but that's not Nintendo's intention. But regardless, that existed. It's not like, say, the Sega Nomad, where people throw that out there and be like, oh, Sega did it first. It's like, no. Sega made a home console they later made a portable version of. And it wasn't really meant to exist that way. That's why things like the font can't change. They're tiny on that screen. Whereas things like that can adjust on the Switch depending on the game. Or Sony and the PSP, originally released as a handheld. People were like, no, that was the first hybrid console because eventually you could play it on a television. Yeah, eventually Sony's like, hey, whatever, here's some cables, plug them in your TV. But that also didn't change the mechanics of the game, nor was it originally the intention. Those are just two flukes. Nintendo's the first one who ever said, let's have it work both ways. So for that reason, I cannot sit here and say, no, this is a portable. I will give it to them. This is a console. Now, it might also, you could make the case that it fits in both generations of home and portable, which is a separate argument entirely. But in the context of what console generation does it sit in, it's in there. That's all I'm saying. It belongs in a console generation. So I discard that first argument. So then you get down to 3. One of the most uncommon consensus that I see, but it's an interesting perspective, is this is actually a 7th gen console. And the reason for that is really just one case, which is if you look at the hardware, it architecturally is more similar to the Wii U than anything else, which was more similar to the Xbox 360 than anything else. By that logic, this thing is basically the same capabilities of an Xbox 360 or a PlayStation 3. Now, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a programmer. I don't think anybody ever really figured out what the capabilities of the PS3 cell architecture ultimately would be, but it was pretty capable. The closest I think was like Last of Us, utilized it the best. Could Last of Us have run on this? Probably. But maybe in some cases the PS3 could have outperformed it. So that's the argument, is from a purely technical perspective, it has more in common with the 7th generation than it does with the 8th or the 9th. Interesting. But it fails the other two definitions because it was released in 2017. The Xbox 360 was released in 2005. The PlayStation 3 was released in 2006. It's not even in the same ballpark of timing, so it doesn't... gone. Marketing intentions. Certainly Nintendo did not sit down with the Switch and be like, man, I know the Wii U didn't work out, and I know the Wii did. Remember how successful the Wii was? What if we make a new console that travels back in time and competes with the Xbox 360 and the PS3? That's where it's at. They didn't sit down and do that because, I mean, they're nuts, but they're not that nuts. So no, it is not a 7th gen console. It meets the technical definition, I'll grant you that, but it fails the other two. So then the next one up that people say is, and this is a very common one, is, oh, it's a 9th gen console. And the argument behind this is generally very limited in scope. It's, well, Nintendo already had an 8th gen console, and it's their new one. Therefore, it's 9th gen. That's the argument of a child. That is not logical at all. And for the reason is simple. If it's a 9th gen console, you have to remember, then its competition is the Xbox Series X and the PS5. Okay. From a technical perspective, the Switch isn't even in the same league as those two platforms. Not even close. Hell, if you go back in time, like we were just discussing, from a technical perspective, it would be 2 generations behind. It's basically a 7th gen console technologically. It's not even as capable as the vanilla-based VCR 2013 Xbox One model. So no, it does not meet the technical definition of being a 9th gen console. Timing-wise, also does not meet the definition of being a 9th gen console. It just celebrated its 4th birthday. Historically speaking, 4 years would actually be an entire generation cycle unto itself. So yeah, doesn't meet that. It actually came out closer to the release date of the Xbox One and PS4 than it did to the release date of the PS5 and Xbox Series X. In fact, the PS4, I think definitely the Xbox One X, and maybe the PS4 Pro, I don't remember offhand, pretty sure it launched after the Switch did. Okay, so no, it's not a 9th gen console on the timing. And then marketing intentions. Do you seriously think Nintendo sat down and been like, man, because we heard about, this was at one time Project NX, which we were hearing about all the way back in at least 2016, if not maybe 2015. Do you really think they sat down in those years and been like, man, in November of 2020, in about like 5 years from now, Sony and Microsoft are going to drop these new things. We just got to get the jump on it. We just got to make something that competes with them now 5 years in advance, but is like 1/3 the capabilities. No, that conversation never happened. Their marketing intentions with this was, wow, the Wii U did not do what we thought. Let's take the things about it that we liked and that people liked, transfer that over, but get rid of the things they didn't and then add this that they might like. That was their motivation. It was basically just, sorry, I forgot about the Wii U. This is our Wii U. This the Switch. What are you talking about? I don't remember Wii U. We went to Wii to Switch. That was our thing. All those games on the Wii, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. You like Pikmin 3? We're going to make a Pikmin 3. It's just on Switch. Not even a joke about that. They removed the digital version off of the eShop right before they released the physical edition of that for the Switch, pretending it never even happened. And then they constantly they pull from the pantry that is the Nintendo Wii U library and say, oh, that would be a good one to bring over. That would be a good one to bring over. And then pretend that they never happened. The Wii U never happened as far as they're concerned, which by that metric, again, would also mean, where does it sit? 8th gen. This is an 8th gen console. It's the only one where that makes sense. You know, it satisfies to an extent the technical definition. It would just be the weakest one of that generation. Well, second weakest. Because nobody really debates that the Wii U was in fact an 8th generation console. This is more capable than that while being less capable than an Xbox One base model. So, okay, it's on the outside rim of technology, but we're going to give it a pass. We're going to say, okay, it just kind of edges in that like neutral zone of like Star Trek between the Romulans and the Federation. There's that neutral zone, and that's where the Wii U and the Switch sit. Okay, it's not technically in Romulan space, but you know, you can kind of go there. Fine. Then from a timing perspective, well, like I said, it is closer to the release of those two platforms. So, okay, again, it sits on the safer side of the border. And then finally, marketing intentions. They sat down and went like, okay, our competition is obviously still Microsoft and it's still Sony, and this is what they have. So we need to make something that's more competitive so that developers can also get on board, blah, 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 blah. Duh. So the biggest argument still against that is really just the childish notion that you can't have two consoles in the same generation. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen that comment. Anybody who ever says that knows absolutely nothing about the history of video game consoles, because this is the 4th time that that has happened in home consoles alone. The previous examples would be, the first one ever, Atari did this. The 2600 and the 5200 were both considered 2nd-gen consoles. Atari competed with themselves. Now, Atari was insane, but that's what they did. In fact, the Atari 2600 ended up beating out and pushing the 5200 off of the shelves. Just happens. Fine, whatever. The next time it happened, Sega did it. Sega released the Sega SG-1000, and then later the Sega Mark III, aka the Sega Master System, both in the 3rd generation. They did it. Then after that, SNK did it. They released the Neo Geo AES and the Neo Geo CD, both in the 4th generation, even though they're basically identical hardware. Yet one had a slight improvement because it was cheaper. Now, does that sound slightly familiar? Oh yes, Nintendo and the Wii U to the Switch. It's basically identical hardware with some improvements, but not enough to warrant anything else. And it just plays the same games you already got, but slightly differently. I'm sorry to those who do not like that answer, but the truth is, yes, this is an 8th generation video game console, which means Nintendo has no 9th generation game console. And I'm sure they will, as I talked about in my anniversary video there. I think they're going to just give us this next little weird hiccup platform, then that'll be an interesting debate, because if it's just like, we don't argue that the Xbox Series X or the PlayStation 4 Pro are 9th gen consoles. Everybody sits there and goes, no, those are 8th gen consoles because they just are. By that logic, and we'll get to that point perhaps eventually, whatever the PS4 upgrade is, or sorry, the Switch upgrade is, it would still have to fall into that definition. That'll be kind of a fun debate to have, but we'll talk about that later, eventually, if it ever happens. But then eventually, yes, they'll have something considered a 9th gen console, but that may not happen for a few years. Maybe like 4 years from now. So, sorry, it's an 8th gen console. Just enjoy it. Enjoy it. It's a good 8th gen console. But yes, it is starting to show its age, and we'll see how that eventually plays out. But regardless, once again, I know it's been a little bit now, but happy birthday again to the Nintendo Switch. Thank you guys very much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe. And if for seriously though, I'm not trying to be a dick about this. If any of you are like, no, that definition doesn't make sense for X, Y, and Z reasons, please tell me. Like, I'm open to new information. I love discussing this stuff. So if somebody's like, you didn't factor this in, tell me. I'd love to hear it. But honestly, can you seriously give me an answer that makes more sense other than it has to be 9th gen because I want it to be? Like, I don't have a dog in this fight. Like, I don't really care where it sits other than just to get the information correct. And by all metrics, it fits in as an 8th gen. It won't be perfectly recognized, just like certain countries are not perfectly recognized. But anyway, that'll about do it for me. If you guys could please do me a favor, like, comment, and subscribe, especially that like button. Smash that like button, yo! But seriously, if you can go into the description, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, the Discord, all that sort of stuff. I always appreciate that. Thank you very much for watching. And again, if you like this stuff, please check out the birthday video in case you missed that, and the other videos. Anyway, yes, thank you very much for watching. I will see you all later.